Shëndetje të nderuar shikues, jemi bashkë në këtë pjesë të emisionit Prime Time në Kanal 10. Do të flasim në këtë edicion të veçantë me zotin Alon Meir, që është profesor dhe studiues shumë vjeçar I rrethanave në lindjen e mesme dhe së fundi edhe ekspert për Ballkanin. Greetings from Prishtina, Mr. Meir.
Nice to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. I want to start by talking what's happening in the US right now with the elections now 2 weeks after they were held. The world is watching, right? How come that still President Trump didn't concede?
Well, President Trump from the very beginning, even months ago, he said that the election is going to be fraud, is going to be rigged, and he wanted to stick to his position. He lost the election, he knows that, and it's a question of whether next few days, or maybe within a week, he will have to concede, because he has exhausted all possible legal avenues. The states that were in question, they already certified the result of the elections. And I think in the next few 2, 3, 4 days, you're going to see many Republicans leaders urging him to concede, and he will concede in one form or another.
But now the transition is not happening as it should be, as it was always, right? Because
that is unfortunate. Yeah, the transition is not taking place as yet, but we are hoping that within the next week or so, once he concedes, then the process of transition will begin in earnest, because that's the only way we operate here in the United States, as you well know.
So President Trump is one of the few to only have one term, right? What happened? How come that Mr. Biden is going to win by a landslide, right? 306 votes and 6 million more votes than President Trump.
That's right. President Trump is not the only president who lost after one term. President Bush Sr. lost after one term. President Carter lost also after one term. President Ford lost also. It's not the first time. Trump has been popular with his base, but the vast majority of the Americans simply could not further tolerate his policies, specifically domestically and on the international scene.
And I want to talk with you, obviously, about Kosovo and the region. With Mr. Biden being the next president, someone that knows Kosovo and the region so well, what is the importance of Mr. Biden's win for Kosovo and Balkans?
Look, I think if you go back to when Biden was vice president, he visited 4 years ago, was it, when a street was named after his son, Bo?
Yes.
President Biden, when he becomes a president, he will be very supportive. I can tell you this for certain. He will be extremely supportive of Kosovo. He will be extremely supportive of starting a dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, because he feels that Kosovo is an important ally. It will have to become eventually a part of the EU, and he is also supportive of the Kosovo's as well as Serbia's integration into the EU. So you will see that once the pandemic is over and some of the urgent issues are dealt with, he will definitely pay attention to Kosovo.
Because everyone here felt that actually this administration of President Trump paid quite big attention in opposition to what President Obama did, which didn't really have any focus in Balkans. President Trump had a special envoy for Kosovo-Serbia talks, and as a result, we have the September agreement in the White House.
Well, I can tell you from what we know here in the United States, President Trump did not do that because he really cares about Kosovo or he cares about Serbia. This agreement, the normalization of economic relation with Serbia, took place only a few weeks ago. And because he wanted some kind of foreign victory win of sort. In reality, however, if you look at the agreement itself, it's really not that great in terms of what's in it. That is, Serbia did not commit itself to stop the recognition of Kosovo by other countries. It agreed only to stop its campaign for 1 year. So the whole agreement is tentative at best. I think when Biden's become the president and he will get involved in this, you're going to see a significant progress. He is not just going to have a deal for a show. He's going to have a deal that is going to be constructive, it will have a long-term implications, and will certainly eventually lead to Kosovo's integration into the EU. And I might want to mention something else to you. In spite of the fact that Putin saw eye to eye with Trump, Putin did not, still objected to Serbia's integration into the EU, and he did everything he can to stop that process. So Trump could not do anything about it. As long as Putin does not want normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, he has succeeded to do that. And Trump could not change that dynamic. I think Biden may be able to approach Russia differently, and we're going to see some significant change in the months to come, especially by appointing his Secretary of State, Blinken, who is known to be very supportive of EU integration of other states in the region.
Yes, he is indeed, and he was in Kosovo a few years ago to support Kosovo for the UNESCO membership. I want to go back to the Washington agreements again. So you say that in general it goes more in favor of Serbia than Kosovo?
Well, you know, I'm not sure. Perhaps at this point, maybe. But the truth of the matter is, for me, as far as I'm concerned, Serbia must end completely its campaign to de-recognize Kosovo. This is, to me, extremely important. And as long as Serbia does not do so, it is not negotiating in good faith. So I think once Biden gets involved, his emissaries are going to have to make this demand. If you want support from the United States, if you want us to be helpful, then you have to stop your campaign, and it's time to come sit down and negotiate a final agreement between you and Kosovo so that Kosovo maintains its independence, because this is just a fact of life. Neither Russia nor Serbia can change, and the United States stand 100% in support of that outcome.
Now, there's been a lot of different viewpoints in Kosovo about the Washington agreements, but there is one point which everyone agrees is very good for Kosovo, which is Israel recognition. Actually, it didn't happen yet formally, but you know, there was the call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Houthi, and Israel is to recognize Kosovo. How important is that?
I think it's important. Look, I spoke to many officials in Kosovo, and when I raised this question, many of them said they wanted to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. And I think this is important. I'm not taking the credit away from Trump. He did this, and he did it well. Kosovo's Israel relations will be an important one. Israel can help Kosovo in many, many different ways, technologically, economically, security, intelligence, and that is extremely important. And I believe that over time, the relationship between the two countries will develop, and certainly Kosovo will benefit greatly from the normalization of relations with the State of Israel.
Well, there is a promise by Kosovo and Serbia, actually by Serbia to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and by Kosovo to establish its embassy in Jerusalem. Can things change with the new administration? As far as I know, it is not a policy of the Biden or Democratic Party to move embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Well, I want you to know is one thing. First of all, President Biden, when he is as a president, he already said he is not going to reverse Trump decision and put the American embassy back in Tel Aviv. So the American embassy is going to stay in Jerusalem. And as long as the American embassy in Jerusalem, the Biden administration will not, I repeat, will not object to any country, anywhere, to establish to their embassy in Jerusalem.
But will not either push them, right? Because right now it's just two countries who have embassies in Jerusalem.
They will not necessarily encourage them or stop them from doing so. Each country will make its own decision, and Biden will not intervene in any country's decision to relocate their embassy to Jerusalem.
It is wise for Kosovo to open it in Jerusalem, right?
Well, you know, Israel capital is Jerusalem. Israel wants to have all countries, if possible, to establish their embassies in Jerusalem. And I think since this normalization become now, this recognition, mutual recognition of Israel and Kosovo, and you might as well start by having the embassy in Jerusalem. It will not hurt. It will not hurt Kosovo. And mind you, Bahrain, UAE, and perhaps Sudan and other countries are establishing relationship with Israel without worrying too much about the future of Jerusalem. So there is a change in the atmosphere. There's a significant change, and we have to keep that in mind. As you will see over the years, more and more countries will put their embassy in Jerusalem because, after all, Jerusalem is the capital of the State of Israel. Having said that, that does not suggest that if there is going to be peace, an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, I do not rule out the possibility that the Palestinian will have a capital in East Jerusalem. That is not out of the question. It remains an open subject, and if and when there's going to be an independent Palestinian state, and I think it will happen, it is only a question of when, it is not unlikely that they will have an opportunity to have their capital in East Jerusalem.
Okay, let's get back to Kosovo. What's your take on the dialogue with Serbia? Should it continue? Because there was a parallel dialogue in Washington which led to the agreements, and there is another one in Brussels with Mr. Lajčák, the EU envoy, trying to broker a deal. Should it be done in Brussels, actually, the agreement of the final recognition?
Look, Brussels is so-called as the capital of the EU. Both Serbia and Kosovo want to integrate into the EU. In my view, it is extremely important that the EU be directly involved in the negotiating process between Kosovo and Serbia. This is very important, even more important than the United States, because in the final analysis, the EU made it condition that once the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo ends, they will both become a candidate for membership into the EU. And so the most important player that can bring this about is if the EU gets involved in the negotiating process between the two countries. I have spoken to members in Brussels when I was there about this particular issue. And I can tell you, the best thing for Kosovo and Serbia to do is pay more attention to dealing with the internal combustion, with the internal problems, and undertake the necessary reform that is necessary, work with the EU closely in order to clear out all the issues and corruption and the problems that exist, and slowly deal with chapter after chapter, negotiate with the EU. That is what is going to be more important than you can have the blessing of the EU. And Biden is going to bless any progress being made, but the negotiation should primarily take place between Serbia and EU through the mediation of the EU. That is Serbia and Kosovo, mediated by the EU.
Okay. What's your take on the work of the specialist chambers? We've just seen recently this month the resignation of President Thaci, who is going to be tried for war crimes together with other former KLA leaders.
Well, look, obviously he resigned because he was indicted and he and others are going to be facing a trial. I cannot tell you what is going to be the result. I'm not aware. I do not know exactly what crimes, if any, he and his colleagues have committed. But the right thing to do is, I think he did the right thing by resigning, going to Hague, and stand a trial. And the judges are going to have to render their judgment. He's done the right thing by Kosovo, and I think he should be, I cannot tell you if he's going to be exonerated or he's going to be found guilty, because I'm not aware of the crime if and when he actually committed these kind of crimes. But the fact that he's done what he's done is the right thing to do.
But the discussion is that Kosovo was the victim. Kosovo Albanians were the victim of the aggression of Serbia, and not many people of Serbia were convicted, and Kosovo leaders, ex-guerrillas of KLA, have been tried for many years, even in 2010 and in a lot of trials. So the fear here is that the perception in the international community is going to change. And what we know and we have faced here is that we were the victims, and we fought to liberate our country against the repression of Serbia.
Listen, I fully agree with you that Kosovo is being the victim. I mean, this is, after all, we've seen and we've been witness to the fact thousands men and boys were executed summarily by the Serbs, Kosovars that have been executed by the Serbs. We know that Kosovo have been the victims. But my point, as far as President Tashi is concerned, he himself decided that he should be facing a trial. And I can only hope that everything is being considered in terms of who are the perpetrators and who are the victims during that terrible, terrible war. But if he were not to appear in front of the court, then that will not be the end of the story. Then he's going to be pursued. And this is going to be good for Kosovo. So, notwithstanding the fact that Kosovo has been the victim, what Tashi has done is the right thing to do, to stand trial, and I'm hoping that he will be exonerated.
Lastly, I want to ask you about your take on what's happening actually in Kosovo with the political landscape. You know, we had a short 50-day Kurdi government which was overthrown legally in the parliament, and we have the Houthi government now, with a lot of questions, and the country can go to snap elections because of the president's resignation. Do you follow? How have you seen what's happening here?
Well, I don't follow exactly the ins and the outs of the various parties, but I do think that a new election is going to have to be held in one form or another, and perhaps sooner than later, because of from the last election until now, there was a considerable amount of uncertainty within the government. Now that Tashi has resigned, and I think it would be a wise thing for the Kosovo's government now to call for a new election, and so that things will settle. Otherwise, there will be always the questions in terms of credibility, in terms of who is controlling what. I think election can settle that. And my advice would be for the Prime Minister, Houthi, to call for a new election if it were up to me.
As far as I've read your tweets, you don't really like the ties that Kosovo has with Turkey, right?
Well, you see, I personally do not believe that Turkey has intention in Kosovo are good necessarily. Erdogan is trying to revive element of the Ottoman Empire. Given that the Balkan states were under the Ottoman Empire, he certainly wants to exert as much influence as he can in Kosovo, specifically because Kosovo also is predominantly Muslim. And he thinks that he should be representing Sunni Islam on the global scale. I think Kosovo should, to maintain its independence, it should not be relying on Turkey unduly. That is, Turkey can be helpful, but Erdogan is just like Trump, you might say. He's really looking for his own personal gain. He wants to revive Ottoman in that part of the world, And even though he's helping financially, he's building mosques, some educational institution. In my view, and I'm very familiar with the Turkish policies. I've been in there. I've been negotiating with them, and I can tell you, his heart is not in Kosovo. He's doing so only because he wants to increase his influence throughout the region, and Kosovo is a sort of an easy prey, you might say, would be the first one to fall into his orbit.
No, everyone wants to have their influence in the region, right? Russia in Serbia, US and EU in Kosovo. Is it like up to us to choose which influence we accept, right?
Absolutely. I think your future, Kosovo's future, lies with the EU, not with Russia, not with Turkey, and not even with the United States. The United States will always be helpful, but your future is with the EU. And I think to go too close to Turkey or too close to Russia is not in the interest of Kosovo. And I think you have to keep that in mind. EU is the future where Kosovo should belong, and Kosovo, this government, future government, should do everything humanly possible to take the kind of reforms, social, political reforms, economic reforms, and deal with corruption on various levels in order to be qualified for integration into the EU. That should be the objective, and every single opportunity that the Kosovo has to do these reforms and to clear its acts, so to speak, that's where Kosovo should be focusing on, rather than allowing Turkey or Russia to meddle into its own domestic affairs.
Thank you very much, Professor Ben Meir, for talking to Channel 10.
It's my pleasure, anytime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kemi qenë të ndëruar shikues në këtë lidhje direkte nga SHBA-ja me profesorin Alon Ben Meir për zhvillimet në SHBA dhe në Kosovë. Shihemi.